Last week we had Bill Gates for dinner here, and he said that he has a ridiculous amount of money, and it's so hard to find appropriate ways to do good with the money.
Yeah.
So what does money mean for you, being the first person in history that has a net worth of a three-digit amount of billion?
The only way that I can see to deploy this much financial resource is by converting my Amazon winnings into space travel. So that's basically, Blue Origin is expensive enough to be able to use that fortune. And I'm currently liquidating about $1 billion a year of Amazon stock to fund Blue Origin. And I plan to continue to do that for a long time. So, and so because you're right, you're not gonna spend it on like a second, dinner out.
Welcome, friends. David here for Left Reckoning 120. How's it going, Matt?
It's going well, David. Good to be with you. I always like to go refresh our memory on Jeff Bezos and how he just can't figure out how to spend all this dough. And I will just tease earlier, we have Corey Pein, whose article in the Baffler about, it's an older article, but it's still relevant, about the privatization of space exploration. It's something that I've been really stewing on for a while, and I forget where my train of thought was going on there because yes, here it is. You'll never guess what it directly precedes that discussion there. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Well, if you want that, we'll be playing the rest of it later. So make sure that you join us. Corey Pein, good friend of the show, and also TMBS alum, will be joining us. And then a little bit later, we have Isi Baehr-Breen, who's going to be joining us to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Minnesota, which is a state that I think a lot of people have been sort of maybe going red in their crystal ball. Hasn't really been the case, and he talks a little bit about why the progressive movement has been as successful there as it has been. We're also going to be taking a quick jump in to look at all the stuff that's happening with our illustrious Attorney General right here in the great state of Texas. And we got more fun stuff coming to the post-game, patreon.com/leftreckoning. If you missed it, we had Emma Vigeland on the program for our bonus episode last Sunday. Really got the right-wingers mad from the 1 minute 30-second clip that Matt put up on Twitter. You're quiet.
Yeah, those people, they live bad. It's very interesting how provocative that is. I especially like calling people pro or anti-homeless libertarians. I think certain right-wingers don't like that formulation, even though it's absolutely true. And I'll just say, as Andrew Gillum, a now disgraced former gubernatorial candidate for Florida, said about Ron DeSantis, a hit dog will holler.
There you go. We'll get access to that over at patreon.com/leftreckoning. But before we get to Corey, we got to talk about the big news here, and that is the likelihood here of very significant cuts to social programs in order to appease the Republican Party. And it's been something that's been a slow boil for a little while. We've been talking about on this program, particularly what it's going to mean for people who are on social programs like TANF, people who aren't SNAP. These work requirements are extremely draconian and nasty and anti-worker. And again, completely avoidable. One, this is something that's avoidable. It had the Democratic Party had the foresight, which they knew about it.
Yes.
To do something about, I'm sorry, like in both of our lifetime, Matt, since you've been covering politics, right? Since we've both been adults in this world. How many budget fights have you seen in this country?
Yeah, I mean, there's especially like one with Joe Biden, should you remember, because he was vice president during Obama's. And there's this thing here, which is, the Joe Biden and the Democratic apologists will say that they're averse they're worried about certain things happening. Well, if you're so averse to this situation, you could have dealt with it in December. And what they're really averse to is dealing with the part of the party who actually wants this sort of shit. So they can actually grind people's faces into work requirements, or can codify the return to student loan repayments, right? Like and there's zero appetite among party leadership to deal with those people. Like it's been a constant, and not even party leadership, but like Jayapal, and like that's why we've talked about the failure of the Progressive Caucus to name that thing, and that's why it's so laughable to consider this FDR sort of
Oh
presidency.
my
Although I
God,
guess,
are you kidding me?
to be fair, FDR wasn't going to call out the like Jim Crow part of it, but he at least like called out the
I
like
mean,
capitalists and
no,
got
of course,
you.
like, but FDR would never let, for example, the Republicans kneecap his major spending policies like this.
Or the corporatists, or pro capital wing of his own party.
Hmm. But you brought up Jai Paul, so let's bring her up for a second. And I mean, before we bring her up, I mean, like, I think everyone at this point knows what's in this, but just a real quick, understanding. One, it does nothing about the military budget, right? It's going to allow the military budget to continue to grow
It's a green
exponentially.
light. Yeah.
There's no attempt, this is talked about as a fiscal crisis, right? Oh, we don't have enough money. We need to like reduce. And when you don't have enough money, you have to do two things. You have to make cuts to spending, right? Even just like on a household, the favorite analogy of the little freaks, the household, like if you don't have enough money, you either need to cut your spending or you need to increase your income. This does nothing to increase the income. In fact, it kneecaps a lot of policies that we're going to at least be able to get back some of the tax revenue that the wealthy hoard. And they already, like, the thing is, like, about the American tax code is this already fucked up in the way that it's written, but then in practice it's even worse, right? So these cuts that are likely coming to the IRS mean that like those super wealthy people who already aren't taxed like on the piece of paper high enough, but also don't pay the taxes that they're required to pay in the first place because they have lawyers and a lot of smart people around them who shield them from audits from the IRS. Cutting that IRS funding means that more and more of those people won't be paying their taxes. On top of it, I mean, the most draconian things is these increases in work requirements for people on TANF and on SNAP. We've already been talking about, for example, what's already happening for working people with the end of fundings for certain Medicaid expansion programs in this country. So working people are already getting hit with that, and are about to get a 1-2 punch of all of these other cuts. And then on top of it, very likely to be a forced repayment of people's student loans after months of Biden saying that your student loans for significant portions have been forgiven.
Yeah, and the only like good news there is it might be saved at the cost of getting progressives to vote for this shit, right? Because right now, Ayanna Pressley is trying to get an amendment passed that saves that provision. But then to say we're going to vote for like work requirements, we're going to go through this whole song and dance by doing work requirements on people 49 to 50. Like, get out of here with this.
Well, let's let Jai Paul talk for a second, and then we can talk a little bit more about the Progressive Caucus.
It is bad policy. I told the president that directly when he called me last week on Wednesday, that this is saying to poor people and people who are in need that we don't trust them. And the average amount of assistance for SNAP, for example, is $6 a day, Jake. I mean, we're talking about $6 a day. And I think it is really unfortunate that the president opened the door to this. And while at the end of the day, perhaps this will, because of the exemptions, perhaps it will be okay. I can't commit to that. I really don't know. And our caucus, and it's not just the progressives, across the ideological spectrum, including problem solvers, by the way, people feel that this is bad policy. So it's very unfortunate that it's even made its way into the discussion, frankly.
But what I'm hearing from
And yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. This is bad policy, right? But what does that mean? Because it's 100% bad policy. You don't even have to really spend a lot of time trolling through the details to recognize that it's bad policy. It's Republicans trying to manufacture a crisis so that they can be able to govern even when they're in the minority. And, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of great statements from the Progressive Caucus over the next few days. There's going to be complaints about how Biden is being too quick to bend over for them, how we shouldn't acquiesce. But the real question at the end of the day for me is this: there was Jai Paul said the other day that that the White House, Joe Biden and them should, quote, worry about whether or not they have votes within the Progressive Caucus. And I'd really like to see that threat delivered on, because we've heard a lot of stuff like that since Joe Biden has become the president when it comes to the Progressive Caucus.
I mean, yeah, that's sort of like where I landed on, and we have Corey Pine here about UFOs. Like, I am absolutely ready to believe that and actually want to. I want to see it.
Yeah.
Why he shouldn't be worried. He should know that he doesn't have it, and like, yeah, I mean,
This is something that is as clear as day, and I'll just say this to sort of wrap up. This is a picture. This is like a window into your past, friends, and this is a window into your future. As long as the progressives in the Democratic Party continue to play the game that they've been playing for far too long, as long as working class politics is sort of sequestered outside of politics, having like slight areas where they can influence this or that politician potentially, this is what it's going to be forever. A threat from the far right, not just complacency from the centrists and the liberals in power, but in this case, like outright willingness, right? Kicking and screaming, but outright willing publicly, right? Making a big deal about it, but a lot of willingness to do things that harm millions and millions of poor working class Americans. And, we could talk about strategy and, oh, well, this candidate is worse than that candidate when it comes to presidential election. But sooner or later, this is just the fundamental realities that we have a government that is either outwardly hostile to working people, or one that kind of like says, I hear you and I see you, but also no chicken this, on the dinner table this week, friends, because we're going to be letting the Republicans write policy for us. It is truly a joke. We've seen the progressives continually falter, and I think most notably when many of them stood with Joe Biden and blocking the railroad strike. This is a moment that I think is really clear. There really is no reason for them to support this agreement. They should all be voting no, and it shouldn't even be a question. If you want to throw in some amendments, right, to maybe lessen some of the blow, to maybe protect certain programs or things like that, do it, and then vote no, because your name should not be on something that is cutting social programs for working Americans. It's just if you call yourself progressive, Lord help me, if you call yourself a socialist, you shouldn't be voting yes on a bill that will take food away from hungry people.
It's almost too late for them, to avoid it, to like the under the gun nature of this, and to the point where they should have just said, no, you're not going to have our votes if you negotiate this thing, because now it's like, I don't know, you take the economy, then it's them and not the Supreme Court. Like, they should have been making it the entire time. Like, it's because of student loans or whatever the fuck. Like, this is a complete catastrophe, and it's one that Bernie put in his Senate stationery in December. Hey, do this now. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is they have a very strong protected part of the party that didn't want to avert this situation, and went right
Still, by the way, has all the power to avert it too.
Oh, of course. I mean, yeah, like it. Look, the 14th Amendment would have been better probably back then to say, hey, we're doing this to give like the markets or whatever. But yeah, I 100% agree. Just do the right thing. And then, like, if there's a fallout, like, that's what happens when you do dumb shit. And you need to actually just move beyond this, because this thing where it's like Biden saying, well, we're going to kick this can down the road, but next time we come across this can, we're really going to look at it then. Like, of course, no, it's going to be, I mean, this is exactly what people were talking about, mint the coin during the Obama administration on NPR Planet Money, right? Like, just really gearing up for next time. And no.
And last thing I'll say is that structurally, for the progressives more broadly, but I think most importantly, for people who identify as like socialists, right? The whole point of doing these kind of things is to be in positions of power. So at moments like this, you can fight for working people, and to continually fail at that, becomes indefensible.
Inflation Reduction Act, yeah.
And beyond that, this also comes to us, to people listening to this program. People did not talk enough about what the end of this COVID funding meant for millions of people on Medicaid. It fell, like, we did a couple videos on it, very, small audience reach on that. Other people who covered it got very, very little traction on that. If you think that that you consider yourself a progressive or a socialist, and you find that like media and framing narratives is important, when these things happen and it's just is another part of the news cycle, right? We're all failing at our jobs as just like as like leftist people who want to see a better America, because it needs to be really clear who the actors are in this kind of thing. Because what is going to be pumped out into the public is that it is the Republican Party who sort of forced out of some brilliant technical maneuver to make Joe Biden do these things. And, they fought hard, but they couldn't win at the end of the day. Right. And it's like, we can laugh at it and it's funny, it's insane, but like, we have to also be able to own this narrative. It's like, no, they are responsible at the end of the day for what they do here. And, it starts certainly with the politicians, and the politicians who consider themselves to be progressives or democratic socialists or whatever. But it also comes down to this entire movement out here, that you can't just let these things move away in the news cycle, because they're really damaging. And they set all kinds of working class politics, not just like the actual experience of people, but just like the idea that things can maybe get better by participating in politics when these things fail.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most useful thing about this sort of failure is how clean it is, because the idea that Biden was maneuvered is, I think, ludicrous. Here's Joe McCarthy, his opponent in this.
For things we bought that we can return, like COVID money, money to China and others, we're bringing that back. We might have a child that has no job, no dependents, but sitting on a couch. We're going to encourage that person to get a job and have to go to work, which gives them worth and value.
So they're saying like a child that has no job sit on a couch collecting welfare. That is the second time he said that. He said, and that's not, the work requirements are for childless adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, that's the mastermind opponent, is the guy who's saying we're putting children to work to like motivate them. Right. And, so you get a clear sense. It's like psychology, right? Like you can dissect the stories you're telling yourself in your mind about your life, but the real thing that's telling the story is how you behave.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. Well, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Corey Pein. So stick around. We're going to be talking about the rich and their efforts to colonize space. We'll see how likely that is, and also if that's a good thing or not.
Yep. Actually, we'll try to bring Corey on.
All right, you want?
Yeah, Corey, are you there? Okay, we might have to give Corey a call.
Yeah.
So yeah, all right, folks. I'll play some music, and we'll be right back. Alrighty, folks. Looks like we have Corey now. Welcome into the broadcast now. One of my favorite tech writers and also a coworker, Majority Report, writing the AM Quickie. Corey Pein, welcome to the show, author of Live, Work, Work, Die.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And I missed
to be
one
back.
work as I say that. Live, work, work, die.
There's 3 works. Yeah, it's okay. I usually give people a pass, just like if they mispronounce my last name. It's
Am I doing that?
No, Pein is right. You got it. I didn't mean to
That's
put that
good.
idea in your head.
if after all this time. So we have Corey back to talk about a subject that's been kind of on my consciousness for a while. I remember back at 2007, 2006, when I was first getting into podcasting in the skeptic movement and the astronomy sort of sphere, they would talk about this privatization debate. And this was before I had like sort of strong socialist conviction. So at that time, it was sort of like I was hearing both sides of it. I'm like, ooh, I'm interested in these guys that say this is going to bring a lot of innovation. But it was kind of like settled. It was like, we're going to do this. And so, Corey, you have this piece in The Baffler. Let me flash that up for people. That I think really, I sort of put the call out for anybody who's done a treatment of this issue. And I didn't know that you'd done a piece in The Baffler, Dawn of the Space Lords. You put up here, and I got this. Let me just share it so people see it. And so I guess the first question is, we know like Elon now, like this whole generation. I feel sad that like almost like current younger generations don't really even have the sort of state NASA experience. But like, what was the public space program? And I guess you can maybe idealize it a little bit, and then you can, I guess, undermine that utopia a little bit. But before we got to this present privatization where Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are leading us into space, what was this? What kind of situation did we have before?
Well, back in the heyday of the space program, it was really a nationalistic beacon. It was sorry. Got to deal with it. I thought locked him out, but it was really like considered the pinnacle of American accomplishment, especially with the Apollo program in the 60s and 70s, where we sent astronauts that actually walked on the moon. Nothing like that has happened since, and obviously nothing like that had ever happened before. So it was a way of America sort of boasting about its technological and scientific advancement over other countries. And it didn't become a sort of privatized playground overnight. Even in 1962, when JFK gave a big speech and said, "We choose to go to the moon," he talked about the jobs that would be created and the new companies that would be created to support that effort. But over the decades since, it's really become what you see today, which is this sort of pathetic picture of guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos launching their toy rockets, and we all get to watch as they explode and don't get anywhere near the moon. And that was a process. It's interesting that you actually heard a debate about that, because the process of privatization really has taken place over decades without a lot of public debate. Mm-hmm. It's something that's been decided in closed rooms for the most part. And I can get into a little bit about the incremental steps along the way if you want. But
yeah, well, I just want to like dwell on. I remember coming up, there was all this, and maybe they still to this day, this advertisement of, this was space technology, and there was this idea that like, and I think you're right, like the sort of naive idea you have growing up is, oh, we went to the moon because we were just curious about science and stuff. And then you realize like, oh, if we weren't trying to intimidate the rest of the world with our technical prowess, we wouldn't have done that either. But it is interesting. Like there's a JFK tape I've heard where he's talking with NASA advisors, and he's like, actually, I don't really care that much about space, right? Like this needs to have some sort of practical impact. But to me, it's like, as cynical as that is, and like you said, the nationalistic element of it, it seemed like more, I don't know, it seemed better than like we played the clip of Jeff Bezos saying, I basically can't figure out how else to spend this surplus cash. than rockets.
Yeah, I mean, why should Jeff Bezos be making all these decisions about
Yeah.
how humanity is going to interact with outer space? There's
Yeah.
really no no precedent for it, and well, there is precedent for it. I mean, the colonial period of world history is probably the closest comparison, and guys like Jeff Bezos seem bent on remaking all those mistakes. And it was better when JFK gave a speech to the UN a year after that 1962 speech I mentioned, where he talked about peaceful cooperation among nations in the exploration of space. And that's an idea that's really been lost. In fact, it's illegal.
Right.
There was a law, an amendment passed called the Wolf Amendment in, I think it was 2011, that said because of national security concerns, the U.S. was no longer allowed by law to cooperate with China in space. Or at least it needed clearance from the FBI, and maybe Congress needed to sign off. So since 2011, that's been an impossibility. And it used to be the sort of utopian idea underpinning the space program. Even if it was military, it's hard to disentangle it from the military applications of launching these rockets and gaining, space superiority over the Earth. That idea that there would be international cooperation was there. So I think you're in solid ground saying it's objectively worse now when nobody's even talking about that.
I know. I thank you for bringing that element up, because you could forgive 8-year-old me for not knowing that we did this because of rivalry with the Russians, because there's the International Space Station, and we're doing all these news stories of look, we are doing international sort of missions together and stuff like that. And yeah, to hear that was outlawed, that is really, I mean, hugely scandalous. But you wanted to talk, or if you want to go on that, but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about the nuance of how this actually did move into a privatization thing, because like you say, I think what I heard on the podcasts on Bad Astronomy or whatever was mainly, or Neil deGrasse Tyson was sort of maybe a manufacturing consent for decisions already made.
Well, guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, he's got different politics than Carl Sagan, who he kind of emulated, And so on issues you really see the libertarian stuff come out with guys like Carl Sagan, or excuse me, with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye. They're very friendly to industry, and they get a lot of their support from industry. And so they're very sympathetic to it. And it's really been industry's push that enabled this privatization to happen. So NASA was partnering with companies from the very beginning, but it wasn't really until the 70s that it started outsourcing heavily. And then in the 80s, with the Reagan administration, legalized private space flights, and you can argue about whether that was a good thing or not, but it wasn't really a possibility until then. And then in the 90s, the Clinton administration set up an Office of Space Commerce under the Commerce Department, which was really coordinating how privatization in space work, finding opportunities for companies there, and then shaping the policies that would allow it to happen. And really, I think some of the worst legislation in this area that passed was introduced by now House Speaker, then just another representative, Kevin McCarthy, and signed by Barack Obama in 2015. And it allowed American companies to claim as their private property things that they find in space. So this is set up to help develop asteroid mining, a very hoped for lucrative area, to encourage private satellite developments like Elon Musk's Starlink, and to create an incentive for American companies to lay claim to what they find in space in a very colonial manner.
Well, I mean, sorry not to cut you off, but I think it's an important point to make is that, regardless of what we do internally in this country, which is usually fucked up and very also colonial as well, there's a lot of gall to say that oh yeah, that those rocks, like the solar system, you can own those things by decree of a government of a territory on the, on the planet.
Well, it's absurd, right? And it's really at odds with a scientific mission. I mean, Elon Musk, his plans for colonizing Mars are really, I've heard some astrobiologists say that if he actually achieves anything like it, it would be the end of scientific discovery on Mars. Now, let's say there's microbes on Mars or fossilized evidence of past microbes. Now, what's going to happen if Elon Musk sends his crews up there and they start digging up rocks, siphoning up water? That is where the evidence for extraterrestrial life would be. And you'd have these companies with a mission of profit, essentially getting to decide what scientific research is done.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to whether or not these guys are even good at it yet in a second. But I mean, I do think that like this is like space as a subject is such a good spot for like social sagitation. I don't know if you were a Star Trek socialist, Corey, but I know a lot of people like had a lot of people I've talked to, like they had some kernel of their radical politics come from like science fiction, thinking about a better future. And like so many good high school, college stone conversations on the couch around like a different way of living do seem to revolve around space. And like, this is just a very clear example of something that like, regardless of even what the history is, like the aspiration is something that should be collective, should be like human centered, right? Being just directly threatened by these private interests and private corporations, in a way that I think a lot of people aren't even wrestling with, like just how serious like these questions could be, as you were just saying.
Well, the idea of whether they're capable of achieving these things is one thing, but as I wrote in the Baffler piece, it's somewhat secondary about whether they can achieve it, because what they're asking for is a free hand from the government to operate as they please in space. Yes. Jeff Bezos wants to build he's not so into colonizing Mars. He wants to build an orbital platform like in that movie Elysium, where all the rich people can go. And he wants to, once that's done, he says, then we can turn Earth into a nature preserve. So it's like, okay, so who's going to execute the mechanics of that? Jeff Bezos? I mean, is he proposing?
Well, the rest of us, like the poor, will be the animals in the zoo, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. That's like Colonel Sanders saying, I'm going to be vegan in heaven. Like, sure, man. Like how, like, I just don't buy that. Like, yeah. Or Elon Musk being like, oh, probably direct democracy. I mean, leading up to that point, we're going to like massively abuse our workers. But once we're there, we're going to do the direct democracy.
Yeah, it's a bit of a charlatan's promise. You can't trust them. And pretty much the only person in the U.S. government that's complaining about any of this is Bernie Sanders. Maybe not a surprise to your audience, but when I was doing my reporting, I found very few vocal critics apart from him who are actually in a position of influence. And I'm not sure he's actually in a position to change, this decades of policy drift in favor of privatization. I'm not sure what it would take. I mean, I'm of the mind that, the United Nations is the appropriate venue for these things, but there are treaties that would restrict private activity in space that the U.S. is not a party to and hasn't ratified.
I think that's really like what I like about the piece is like to the extent, and why I think David's right in saying this is a radicalization, because like to the extent you take these issues seriously, like extraterrestrials or like space travel to other systems, it needs to not be authored by these guys, because like the way that they say like, okay, that asteroid's ours. That's exactly the sort of behavior that would make us be very afraid of a visitor from another solar system, right? If all of a sudden they decide, oh yeah, actually Earth, nice water you got there. We can use some of that, right? Like that's exactly, it's just us projecting our current values. And it's like, again, what David said, the colonial period, like Francis Drake, all these, like they're pirates for states to colonize places. And that's literally what these guys want to be, is they want to be the pirates.
Well, it's not just us. Yeah. When you talk about us projecting our values, it's not really us. It's this sort of, patriarchal, old fashioned idea of who innovators are and who explorers are and who scientists are. That is very colonial in that tradition. And, when you even drill down into the workplace policies, this is another argument against privatization. I mean, SpaceX, allowing rich people to buy tickets to go up into space, you're not going to see the same diversity of different kinds of people going into space and doing that work as you would if the federal government were doing it. It's just a fact, and it's already happening.
Sorry, this is a very parochial point, but like one thing that always made me happy as like a Texas guy, and somebody who's also very interested in space, or just as a Southerner, it's like so many of these characters were just like, they were just like Bubbas, right? They were just like redneck guys who the government would hire. Obviously, a lot of them came out of the military or whatever, but they were just like guys from small towns across the South that they're just like, you're going to be like the first person to go out into the universe, right? really, really amazing. And like, I'd prefer the government with its limitations, maybe having a more representative body of people having access to that than just like, yeah, do you have, what is it, $250,000 or whatever to just blow away, to be in orbit for 5 minutes, as the kind of line for who gets to go to space.
Well, it's not just diversity in hiring; it's also workplace safety and other rules that are, they don't just come out of nowhere. They're actually important for getting the job done right. And at least 8 SpaceX Starship rockets have blown up in the last 3 years. The most recent being a couple of months ago over Texas, and creating a huge environmental problem that there's now lawsuits over and things like that. That shouldn't be happening. But when you look, SpaceX, as I discovered reporting my book, has a nickname among people that are the cohort to go work for it, and it's SlaveX. And it's the kind of company where you might do a 12-hour shifts, or have to wake up at 3 a.m. to answer an email from Elon Musk because it's so urgent. I mean, that's not how you like sending humans into space, or even just objects into space, is pretty refined work. And it shouldn't be done by people pulling all-nighters like they're doing Silicon Valley software or something. It's fundamentally different.
So we do a lot on Musk here, particularly in like Boca Chica with SpaceX and the damages there. But we haven't really covered Bezos's company and like the other ones that are like getting into this privatization. I mean, could you give like the audience a little bit of like the state of play, for these companies at the current moment?
Yeah, sure. I think the first one that people might have heard about was Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. I'm not sure the state of that. I think he's had to sell off some assets recently. A lot of these are money losers, money-losing projects, sort of billionaire vanity projects in a way. Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, which, as your clip said, he peels off Amazon profits and pours them into this project. As far as working conditions and stuff go, it's reputed to be similar to SpaceX, which is not great, and probably the engineers and astronauts would be happier in the federal workforce, I would imagine. And then you've got SpaceX, which is sort of the flashiest of the bunch, and maybe the most diversified in terms of what it's doing. I mean, SpaceX is also launching these Starlink satellites. We mentioned earlier how hard it was to disentangle space exploration from military programs, and that's really obvious with Starlink, which has become a crucial part of Ukraine's war effort, and which Elon Musk sort of show another way that this kind of privatization is really biting society in the ass. At first he said he was going to support Ukraine's war effort with Starlink networking capabilities out of the goodness of his heart for free.
Yeah.
After a couple months or a few months, he says, actually, this is costing too much money. So I'm going to need the Pentagon or Ukraine or somebody to pick up the tab for this. And the Pentagon was like, are you serious about this? Like, I think he eventually backed down because the PR backlash was maybe more than he anticipated. But he's really following a tech industry tried and true business strategy there, which is embrace, extend, and then extinguish. So you give the product away, you get people to embrace it, and then you turn the screws. And regardless of how you feel about U.S. support for the war in Ukraine, I mean, that is a pretty shady thing to try to pull.
Yeah.
And you can imagine how it might work in other domains. And part of the reason these billionaires are willing to pour so much of their own profits, their own money into these projects, is they want to own the space infrastructure. Because as countries get more invested in space, whether that for military reasons or genuine scientific curiosity, what have you, to own the infrastructure that allows it to happen really extends their power, not just in space, but on Earth as well.
I mean, it's a wild time where Elon's kind of branded himself as a bit of an outsider. That you say in your piece that I think the Chinese space industry envies his closeness to the U.S. government as a contractor.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that China just announced a manned mission to the moon for 2030. I think Russia is aiming for one around then too, but I guess I would say China is more likely to achieve it based on their recent performance in space. But China does have, despite being a communist-run country, does have a lot of private companies involved in its space program. My understanding is, though, that most of them are get regional funding. That may be changing if they're trying to do a manned mission to the moon. But yeah, from what I read, Chinese companies that are in the space industry are jealous of Musk's access to decision makers in the U.S.
So let's play now. I do have this direct lead in to Jeff Bezos. He's talking to a guy for Business Insider, I believe it was. And this is what he was talking about right before saying, I couldn't figure out what to spend my money on. Oh, crap. I have to. I'll be sorry. I need to just refresh and I'll be right back.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, while Matt's doing that, I mean, could you talk a little bit about the waste that's going on right now in space too? Because that's something that's unless you're ready, Matt. You know, like the way that some of these companies are operating in our atmosphere, right, isn't always the most conscientious of like the future.
Yeah, they're leaving a lot of junk in space, which poses a threat to the existing space station, other spacecraft that are already up there doing scientific work. There's a lot of concern about pollution, like polluting the sky, the night sky as well, so to make astronomy harder and things like that. But you know, it's funny. You look over the sort of policy wonk discussions about privatizing space, and actually space junk removal is supposed to be the next big market.
It'll be a booming industry, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying like we'll get around to that when we can figure out how to monetize it, and not a second before.
Exactly.
Here is Jeff Bezos right before talking about how he can't figure out how to spend his money.
So when you go study homelessness, there are a bunch of causes of homelessness. Mental incapacity issues are a very hard to cure problem. You know, serious drug addiction, a very hard to cure problem. But there's another bucket of homelessness, which is transient homelessness, which is, you know, a woman with kids, the father runs away, and he was the only person providing any income. And they have no support system, they have no family. That's transient homelessness. You can really help that person. And you, by the way, only need to help them for like 6 to 9 months. You get them trained, you get them a job. They're perfectly productive members of society.
Last week we had Bill Gates for dinner here.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. So for people who are maybe watching later, then Bezos goes on to give his famous line that the reason he's investing in space is he has no place to spend his money.
And one of those buckets, I guess, just to circle back, was people that were not intelligent enough or too drug addicted. To have a home. So, I mean, that's the guy who, just decide, well, you just decide. Like, that's the thing is like, what is this for now? Because like we had this idea of, space exploration, but now when like Elon's rockets blow up, I'm not thinking, oh, we learned a bunch in the failure to get us to the Saturn next time. It's I'm glad that went up because anything you did learn would have been proprietary information anyway.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that these guys don't know how to solve? It's a wonder there's even any problems in the world at all, considering that we've got these oligarchs, with essentially absolute power through their money. They know about homelessness, they know about space. They're really the biggest Dunning-Kruger syndrome cases around.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, well, let's talk about the practicalities now, if you don't mind, Corey, because, big claims. I mean, I know there's the fight between Bezos about whether or not Mars or the moon is a more viable target for the near future. But in terms of because like, all right, let me devil's advocate for a second. Like the argument I've heard from some folks, even some people who were involved that I know who've been involved in the space industry, the argument that they say is that space exploration is very expensive and it's difficult and there's a lot of potential failures. So why not let the rich and powerful, as Bezos said, just sort of burn their money because they have no other place to do it versus the government? I mean, how effective have these folks been at like what they're sort of setting out to be? Maybe starting with Musk, who's the boldest and the brashest out of all of them.
Not effective at all. I mean, according to Musk, in 2017, the missions to Mars were supposed to be underway last year. So, they're always there's a thing with timelines in tech. I think the magic number is 5 years. Like, if you just say it's 5 years out, nobody is ever going to be able to call BS on you, because it's far enough. It seems like, oh yeah, if there's some serious obstacles, maybe they can get that figured out in 5 years. But it's also long enough that people aren't going to remember that you made the false promise when you did. So yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. And so far, all they've managed to do is take some rich people and celebrities up into space for joyrides. I can't, the next Blue Origin project is to create basically an office park in space for companies that want to locate in orbit to do research or marketing or whatever purpose. And it's just interesting to me that the biggest idea he could come up with was to recreate the suburbs in space. I mean, it's pathetic. Really, it's really pathetic. Musk's ideas for Mars are kind of half-baked as well, but he seems to have, his idea for terraforming Mars was to drop nuclear weapons over the poles and dissolve the ice into water. And apart from, the military strategy involved in giving a guy like Musk, who we've all seen how erratic he is from his ownership of Twitter, nuclear weapons to play with.
Jesus Christ, please no.
Again, it raises the issue of who should be deciding who gets to do that. What humans have the authority to decide the future of an entire planet, just based on what? The fact that they built successful capitalist enterprises.
PayPal, right? Like,
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like,
Again, I ask, like, when we assess like extraterrestrial, if they were thinking about like, okay, using a nuke on another planet, that would be called threatening behavior, and that's like the first step we're taking on this planet.
Well, in his dreams. So I think what the left should be advocating for is international cooperation and a oversight, I guess, would be the normie word to use. What's the oversight on SpaceX right now? I think with the last explosion in April and on the environmental fallout of that, people should be taking a hard look and saying, well, where's the oversight been? Has there been a deficit in oversight here? And, really digging into the details of these contracts. How many extensions are they getting? Mm-hmm. Are they actually delivering on the promises? I mean, I have some of the same questions that you posed, because I haven't seen the nitty-gritty of some of these contracts. And is it just, as Bernie Sanders has been asking, why are we shoveling money to these billionaires? I mean, shouldn't the civilian oversight really not only be setting the goals for the programs, but tracking, the performance as well?
Let's be really clear about that, because I think that's an important point too, is the idea that like it's like self-funded.
It's not, though. It's not self-funded. I mean, neither of these companies would be in continued operation if they weren't getting government contracts. I think it's because of the practicalities of space, of the laws that are there, the military interest. If Bezos and Musk did not have cooperation from the government, they wouldn't be in this business. Mm-hmm. So, I can see someone who I think a lot of engineers and scientists joined these companies because they were frustrated with the slow pace of the government programs. Space exploration hasn't been very sexy for the past few decades. So the idea that there were these hotshot, billionaires willing to pour their money into it was pretty enticing, I think, for a lot of employees, who then found the sad truth that they're working for Silicon Valley a-holes who also, can't deliver on the core product.
I mean, it's like, sorry, man, go ahead after this. I was just going to say that, like, it's a devastating thing. I've been lucky to know a lot of scientists, and it's just like devastating how much scientific research in this country now is so beholden to the power of like the rich and powerful, right? The free exploration, scientific inquiry. Like, there's a lot of like, I don't know, like pop ideas about what that is, that there's just people working in nice government labs, but more and more of those people are just exposed to the most brutal aspects of the American market, right? And like, it truly limits what we're able to do.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be really interesting to see how these Chinese and Russian moon missions pan out in the next decade or so. and what happens with the U.S. space program. I don't have a lot of hope that we'll have a whole paradigm change and get back to the ideals of international cooperation in short order without some kind of, something would have to happen to inspire that. I don't know what it would. Maybe just a change in the U.S. position would be enough. I'm not sure China would be running its own space station if it was easier to cooperate with the International Space Station, for example. But what you do have in these different countries is competing systems and competing models of how to get there. And I'm not sure that the U.S. strategy, which is right now focused on lowering the cost of getting to space, and that's how do you do that? Same as in any industry, by squeezing labor. I'm not sure that's going to work out for us. So, yeah, go ahead.
There's a Neil deGrasse Tyson quote that I want to anticipate this objection. It says only rich and famous people flew in airplanes in the 1920s and 30s. Then it became a whole industry. If you were around back then, are you saying are you saying stop wasting your money on this stunt? And I gotta say, like, first, I don't think that history is exactly right. I think like there's a lot of state investment, particularly around World War One, that really kicked things off. I don't think it was just like rich guys, doing super planes. Like I'm imagining some sort of like steampunk rich guys with their fancy flying. No, there was massive state investment in this stuff, and to the extent that like they became through being a consumer product more democratic, it's not because rich people liked it that way. Like it's not like they didn't resist that every way. I don't know. Just what do you guys think about that? Like rich guys flew so we could all fly later.
It sounds pretty dubious to me, and not to mention glib. I mean, like I'd like to know what his source is for that. It sounds like something he kind of made up off the cuff, almost. Like which rich guys? Are you talking about the Wright brothers or what? Like what?
Because like to me it's like I don't know, these sort of transportation decisions don't really happen that democratically, and that's like this is just the new frontier of that, right? Like it basically decided there was the rail era. You go ahead, David.
All of this we're seeing right now is like it's like the height of the like contradictions of the American state, right? Like the America was like dynamic, yes, because of like colonialism is this unique position in the world after World War II, etc. But also there was like an effort that like the state needs to play a major role in innovation and in technology, right? You can talk about the purposes of that or the interest in that, but it was always there. And what we're seeing right now, like, is like, I don't know, like a perfect culmination of so many aspects of state investment have been completely privatized. There's always private interest. I think you can make the argument in American government policy in what it's investing in. But right now it's like, we have to find a way to make sure that some rich guy feels that he's going to get enough of a return to do anything. And it's tremendously wasteful. It's sad because it's stagnation, right? It's the sense of nothing can really get better. We just sort of have to hope that nice Mr. Bezos and nice Mr. Musk can maybe have our best interests in heart. Maybe they don't want to nuke Mars. Maybe they don't want to turn the moon into like an offshore factory for making t-shirts or something like that. But it's really dark.
Well, it's really, it's disappointing when you read the language of the legislation that's passed over the years and the agency reports. Over time, commercialization of space became a goal in and of itself. So you could tell that the space program was succeeding because so many more companies were, getting involved in launches and putting satellites into space and things like that, making money, trying to make money, and that it's just a really impoverished vision of how we interact with our environment. Space is part of our environment, right? It's just part that we can't live in without a lot of support, technological support.
And it's like Elon gets to simulate the progress of all these. So basically for like the investors, instead of like, oh, look, we got this new type of tunneling thing. It's like, does that look all that different than how they do tunnels in Belgium, for instance, or wherever? But it has to be sold as like, ooh, this is the cutting edge of everything. And you know what? I just say, I hope China kicks our ass to the moon, and I would love it if basically what happens to American space program is what happened to American basketball program in the mid 2000s, where we started getting bronze medals, and we have to get serious about getting the best talent, which is not these jokers, in charge of it. But Corey, is there anything else you want to say on our topic for the evening?
No, I think that about covered it. We covered the whole space, so to speak. Sorry about that.
I don't have my
But yeah.
rim shot.
Thanks a lot
Corey,
for having me.
Where should people follow your work?
Well, these days, most of my output is for the AM Quickie, which is Majority Report affiliated newsletter at amquickie.com. It's 5 days a week, but only 3 of those days are free. And I'm still on Twitter. I'm trying to get a Blue Sky invite.
Me too. Yeah, if anyone has them, send them to us 3, please.
My Patreon for my podcast, News from Nowhere, is still up, but I haven't put out a new episode in quite a while. So, that's there if you just like what I have to say. But yeah, check out the AM Quickie. We recently launched a premium product, and I try to cover basically everything you need to know in a day in 1,500 words or so in a morning email. So check it out.
There you go, folks. Corey, thanks so much, man. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really. See you guys.
Yep.
Man, yeah. Fucking makes me sad.
Yeah. I'm looking at Neil deGrasse Tyson right now.
Dude, he's so bad with that. I mean, the fall off from a Sagan to a deGrasse Tyson is massive.
Yeah. Was Sagan? I got to look at. I know Sagan was
good.
Was he good? Yeah.
Yeah. No, he was very good.
Yeah.
I mean, like, don't want to overstate it. You don't want to read too much, and but also remember the environment he's talking into was not the most friendly to being a real lefty in the way that I think he was. But yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's like night and day. Because like, I'm not trying to be like too like dorm room about this, but there's something about space and that like humanity that I think is like that like human inclination to like see what's on the other side that like I think like melts down the kind of contemporary historical barriers on your thought, right? Like it's a good challenge, right? Because if you can imagine like being interplanetary, it's very dark to think of still living under capitalism. I mean, what's the sci-fi show The Outer Rim, right? Which is on Amazon Prime. Bezos saved it, right? Is that the right name for it?
I've heard the story. I don't know what the name of the show is called.
I want to make sure I'm getting it right. If I'm getting it wrong, somebody correct me later. It's like a classic sci-fi. Outer Range is what it's called.
Right.
And it's like a very classic sci-fi story. Actually, that's not even it. Fuck, it doesn't matter. I'm fucking it up. Expanse. Thank you, Expanse. The Expanse. I love The Expanse. It's just been a little while. The Expanse is like a really cool show. I love it. Right. I've been a fan of it for a while. Bezos buys it because it was going to go under. And there's something, I mean, again, like I like the show. I'm not spoiling anything for folks, but like there's something that's really sad about it that basically it's like we are like interplanetary species and we're still under like capitalism. Right.
Yeah.
That like the universe can change. Right. And we still have bosses. We still have exploitation. And I will say in the seasons after Bezos takes over, the radical bent starts to decline pretty significantly. Right. And it's like for me, it's like it was a frustrating thing because it's like even in fantasy, right, these guys are like influencing how we think about the universe, which is super sad to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta say, when I think of like when I've listening to those astronomy podcasts, they get into the practicalities of like going to Mars, and I gotta say, couldn't pay me enough. Fuck that! I'm not going to Mars. You shitting me? There's no Paris on Mars. Like you can't come back to Earth. People like the thing about the Mars thing, the moon. Okay, you can maybe talk me into that. The Mars thing, unless we get a massive advance in speed of travel. and radiation protection. You can only go when they're like aligned in orbits. Like there's all sorts of things that are really confounding for like, you can't just make quick trips back and forth. And I don't want that. I'm not going someplace for 30 years,
Yeah.
right? Especially a place that doesn't have, NBA games. So like maybe the moon, but that's the thing about this is like, is it's anti-human. And like so much of the AI stuff, like do you not understand that the human element is lacking when someone puts a chatbot that purports to be Socrates and a chatbot that purports to be Bill
I think
Bill
we're
Gates?
gonna play that in the post game. It's so dark. It's
Do you
it's
not
a real
understand?
perversion. It's a perversion of humanity. A lot of this ideology around those folks is a real perversion of humanity, and it sucks. I mean, we didn't get to make the point with Corey, but like, there's something sad to me about if you're a young kid. Like, I was super into space. I want to be an astronaut. Like, probably half of our audience when you're 6. Sad to me to think that like people are watching SpaceX launches on TV instead of a NASA one, right?
Yeah.
It like, it embeds the future in these guys' hands in a way that's really nasty. And as Corey was saying, it's not particularly accurate because they're not good at achieving the things they set out to do, right?
Absolutely.
It would be a problem even if they were, like innovating and changing the game. There's
Right, we
something
would
really
still be
perverse about them
complaining about it.
owning that like cultural space, that idea of it, and also just fucking up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's super
Yeah,
dark.
even if they were doing a competent, we would still be whining, but we just have more justification now. Yeah, Dawn of the Space Lords, Corey
Yes.
Pine. Baffler, great magazine.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with it, that's like OG classic, great publication.
Yep.
All right, folks. Well, we've had a very big week in the state of Texas. A lot has happened, and I think we got to keep covering it. Most importantly, obviously, we were graced by a visit from a very important dignitary of state, Mr. Boris Johnson. We could play a couple seconds of this.
Thank you very much, and God bless you all, and good luck with cutting the budget and cutting taxes for the people of Texas. Because
gavel. Give us a gavel.
Give us a gavel?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we gavel you out. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, Mr. Boris Johnson did visit my home, and I was driving around town hoping that maybe I could catch a glimpse, but I should have gone to the Capitol. There's something about this Boris Johnson thing that I think is really funny because basically, if you don't follow Texas politics, last week we were coming towards the end of the legislative session, which has now been extended, but we'll get into that in a second. Basically, like, Boris Johnson comes to Texas and the entire GOP just goes into complete free fall and civil war. Like, literally that day, Boris Johnson gavels in the Senate, and there was like a red wedding style night in the Texas legislature. The House and the Senate, who are both obviously run by Republicans, have been feuding for a long time, and it just exploded shortly after Boris Johnson gavels in that session, with the House and the Senate killing each other's bills, putting poison pills on a whole host of things. Of course, if you watched the show last week, we played this video of Dade Phelan, the Speaker of the Texas House, that was sort of pushed out, very likely by friends and allies of our Attorney General Ken Paxton. Dade Phelan appearing very, very inebriated, if you haven't seen that. And the legislative session ends. Governor Abbott has now extended this, has called for the first special session, and there'll probably be more. Remember, if you're not familiar with Texas politics, we have one of the shortest, I think, if not the shortest, certainly out of all the major states in population, the shortest legislative window. It's every 2 years for only a couple months, which is pretty incredible when you think about how big Texas is, that we only have a functional government for a few months out of, every 2 years. But Bojo comes to town, shit gets fucked up, everyone's fighting with each other, and then all of this weird stuff happens. So Ken Paxton calls on the Speaker of the House to resign from his office for this video of him seemingly being very inebriated. And then shortly after it is revealed that the House has launched their own investigation into Ken Paxton that's been going on for a while for allegations of very extreme corruption. If you don't already know, before all of these House charges came out, Ken Paxton is somebody who is always in the news for his willingness to push the law. He has open investigations against him for securities fraud. So serious, by the way, that he faces 99 years in prison for these. So this is not some kind of slap on the wrist bullshit. This is very serious stuff. But
just been the attorney general.
It's just the attorney general, right? Just normal attorney general stuff, right? But what I think really irked the House was Ken Paxton, whose office is always in scandal, asked yet again for the Texas government, the taxpayers here, to pay for another one of his his settlements. There was a $3.3 million settlement that was agreed to with former staffers who were threatened by Ken Paxton when they were working in his office, and he had asked the government to pay his bills for him again. So this happens. Paxton calls on Dade Phelan to resign, and then the House releases its investigation into him, and it was much more broad than I think a lot of people expected. Shortly after that, there is this video, which we played last week, or I played on the Gristle stream, of a dumpster outside of the Attorney General's office on fire. Now, to be clear and fair, the Attorney General's office came out and they said they were looking for the perpetrator. That person has reportedly been arrested. The claim is that somebody just threw a cigarette in the dumpster. Regardless if it's true or not, or if there's any nefarious play, very, very, very strange stuff that has been happening. So these charges come out against Ken Paxton, and they're serious. He has been charged with abuse of official capacity for diverting senior employees to perform work that benefited Paul, this person who is a real estate developer in the city of Austin, where the Attorney General's office provided at least $72,000 in taxpayer-funded labor costs. Again, just for some rich fuck in town who just happens to be a major donor to Ken Paxton's office. Misuse of public information for allegedly providing that same major donor with an internal FBI file related to an investigation into the developer. And another charge of misapplication of fiduciary property for allegedly hiring an outside lawyer for $25,000 to work inside the Attorney General's office without the knowledge or consent of senior staff to perform work that principally benefited the real estate developer in the city of Austin, right? Extreme stuff. But this is all in a backdrop of the House and the Senate effectively being at war throughout most of the session. Now, don't get this misunderstood idea into your head that like the House is some kind of group of like radicals or conscientious Republicans. These are people vying for power over each other. And if you don't know anything about Texas politics has been a one-party state rule for a very long time. So all of the people in positions of power, they want to be the big dog.
I tell you what, all those boys are, well, maybe they're missing a trick, not fundraising off of dumb Democrats in like suburban New York. Like to say like, oh, this guy's against Paxton. Well, let's give him some money. But you might need to do that where like Texans don't get offended by it. But
no, well, I mean, and you even had some House members in the Democratic Party vote present and not take a vote against impeaching Paxton. Paxton releases a statement calling the Speaker of the House again, who is a Republican, like full stop Republican, of being liberal Speaker Dade Phelan for sabotaging his work as Attorney General. Quote, Paxton says, every allegation is easily disproved, and I look forward to continuing my fight for conservative Texas values. As I said earlier, there was a bloodbath on Tuesday night. This vote comes out on Thursday evening in the House, where overwhelmingly Ken Paxton is impeached by the House. And the impeachment, just to be clear what the process is, impeachment, House brings impeachment charges, says that there needs to be a trial. Then it goes to the Senate, where, by the way, it's a body of only 31 people. One of those people is Ken Paxton's wife. But let's just play just a second of this video right quick. This is sort of the fallout, because these are the people that Ken Paxton, Patrick, and Donald Trump have been calling liberals. So we got a second of Ken Paxton defending himself, and then we'll go to the House.
The fact that I was prohibited from presenting evidence to defend myself reveals
that this shameful process was curated from the start as an act of political retribution.
So this is about facts, and this is about evidence, and at the end of the day, my call.
Not trying to be stereotypical, but this is the guy that they're calling a liberal. Right? It's just no.
Yeah, like unless he takes that suit off and he's got like a full sleeve tattoo and he owns a bicycle shop, like I don't think he's a lib.
The mustache is pretty new. I'll give him that. It's a good look. It's a glow up. It's kind of like when Ted Cruz grew a beard. You're like, all right, somebody gave him some good advice.
That was too good of advice, honestly. Whoever you gotta stop whoever's giving that advice.
Corruption. And that's why we're proceeding to a trial in the Texas Senate.
So Ken Paxton is now impeached, which means he is effectively, his office is on pause. He is on the sidelines until either Governor Greg Abbott puts a replacement in or these proceedings finish. The plan right now is that the trial has to be held before August, I believe, 28th, which is probably bad for Ken Paxton, because it means that this can be kicked down the road for a few months, maybe get another guy. Because I'm sorry, one of the nicest and cushiest jobs in the Republican Party right now is to be the Texas Attorney General, because all you do is sue the Biden administration on whatever the fuck you want, right? It is like a sweet gig. It gives you a lot of national attention. There are people, I'm sure, who are clamoring to be in that position, and I'm sure would do just as much damage as Ken Paxton has as the Attorney General, but maybe without the fucking $1 million indictment sitting over his head.
Existing legal baggage, yeah.
So, and again, like, remember that one of the things that really probably set this off was the fact that he asked for money again to pay for his legal wrongdoings, asked for taxpayer money to pay for a settlement for him. And Ken Paxton, of course, Matt, I'm sure you know, acted very innocently by calling up the vast majority of the Republicans in the Texas House and threatening them with political consequences if they took a stand against him, right? Acted like a mafia boss, and it seems like the Republicans in the Texas House are done. I say let them fight. The more that this can distract them and take them away from other things is good. It certainly took up the most of the energy in the last few days of the Texas legislative session. Again, we're in a special session now, but that's a limited scope. But the last thing I want to do is to just remind you who Ken Paxton is, and correct the record a little bit, because Ken Paxton did what any innocent person would do. Went and talked to Mr. Steve Bannon.
It's certainly critical to my state, and that's why we fought off these 12 lawsuits. We had them in Houston, we had them in San Antonio, we had them in Austin, we had them in the counties where you'd have the most liberal judges. And it was a concerted effort nationally with lots of money going into it. And just knowing that we had 12 lawsuits that we had to win. And if we had lost one of them, like we lost Harris County, Trump won by 620,000 votes in Texas. Harris County mail-in ballots that they wanted to send out were 2.5 million. Those were all illegal, and we were able to stop every one of them. Had we not done that, we would have been in the very same situation. We would have been on election night. I was watching election night, and I knew when I saw what was happening in these other states, that would have been Texas. We would have been in the same boat. We would have been one of those battleground states that they were counting votes in Harris County for 3 days, and Donald Trump would have lost the election.
Okay, so let's say one thing up top. Ken Paxton has been a willing advocate for Trump in his election fraud nonsense, right? But let's be very clear about what Ken Paxton is talking about here, because it's a very funny double move that he's doing. What he's talking about, just to correct the record, because a lot of people have gotten really worked up, and I'm not saying it's good, right? But a lot of people, I think, and he's also doing this on purpose. He wants you as a lib out there to think what you're thinking, that he's saying that basically we eradicated 2.5 million votes off the voter rolls that would have flipped the election in Texas to Joe Biden instead of Trump. No, what he's talking about doing there was that he was fighting against mail-in ballots in the state of Texas, because there were pushes to extend mail-in ballots in the 2020 election so that people might not be exposed to the COVID-19 virus when they went to vote for president. So he was arguing against people who were saying that they should have access to a mail-in ballot because they might have, they don't have immunity to the COVID-19 virus. Therefore, they should get, medical ruling that allows them to vote via mail, which we don't have in the state of Texas generally, right? Without some exceptions. He's doing that because it gets you worked up. And then Ken Paxton is like the fighter against election fraud for the Republicans. And then for the Republican people, they get to say Ken Paxton's out there fighting for us, because Ken Paxton, despite all of his failings, all of his corruption scandals, remains wildly popular with the Republican Party base, not just in the state of Texas, but nationally, and certainly with Donald Trump, who has been putting his thumb on the scale in this state.
Is Trump? How active is Trump in?
Trump has been very active. I should have pulled up some of the Truth Social. I usually have to go through you to get those things. I'm not.
Well, because I saw, yeah, I saw an influencer, a former Trump 45 official. It was a D1 cheerleader. I forget what her name is, but she was like, "This is the uniparty. The rhinos joining in the uniparty attack on Trump," and it's fascinating to see that split be elaborated. To me, I don't know. Maybe Trump has to take his allies where he gets them, but even for Trump, who I think is a criminal,
Yeah.
I think basically like a lifelong criminal, like New York real estate, I think Paxton is a little bit too obvious in it. But I wouldn't blow any of my this is the uniparty stuff on a guy who's under indictment. Like, I don't know how long ago. This has been like this like for so long. It's wild that whole state.
It's absolutely wild. And from as of today, his wife has not recused herself from voting again, in a very small body, by the way, in this trial, which will be very interesting to watch. But
And so this goes to the Senate now, and my understanding from you is that the Senate is more right wing than the House. Is that correct?
I think the Senate is more loyal to like the big three, being like Patrick, Paxton, and Abbott right
Okay.
now, because the House gets its power through Dave Phelan, who has taken a role in sort of being against Paxton, challenging Patrick. That's why they're calling him liberal, Phelan. So anyways, we'll be watching this. I think that like the thing is, though, that the fact that the trial is going to be so much later probably doesn't work in Paxton's favor as much as you might think. Because one, he's out of power. It creates an opportunity for maybe Abbott. Abbott has been very silent on him the past few days. This is Tuesday, May 30th. Maybe he says something while we're live or something later. Who knows? But as of now, he hasn't really said too much about it. About whether or not he would appoint somebody as an interim AG, to operate in the next few months. But like, let's just say he does. I mean, that takes some of the luster off of Ken Paxton. It gives the right wing a new person to rally around. Two, it also like it extends the amount of time. Like Paxton's going. The reason I want to bring up the Paxton thing is not to like defend Paxton's honor. It's to like make this point that Paxton has this opportunity right now to get a lot of media play because he's in the news. So he's going to go up there and try to say the most outrageous stuff. Ken Paxton played a huge role in purging people and trying to prevent people from voting in Harris County. It's not to say that like he's not participating and trying to deny people the right to vote, but he wants to sit here and say, I took 2.5 million people away for being able to vote in that election, right? Because it makes the Republicans who are going to be loyal to him feel a need to be loyal to him. Anyways, the point is that in 3 months and 2 months or whatever, in August, his ability to be able to project that power might be more and more limited. I don't know how it will turn out. I'm not going to sit here and make predictions, but I would imagine that Ken Paxton probably wanted to trial sooner rather than later. So if anything, the fact that it's been pushed backwards probably is not very good for Mr. Ken. So we'll be watching this closely. We'll have our Paxton watch on the program over the summer. I know Matt's very sad that a fellow North Dakotan is being treated very, very
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, this is yet another case of a guy deciding to take his political acumen to the South and getting a very frigid reception. And you hear about Southern hospitality, but I mean, there's another example of a guy
Is this
who
Southern hospitality?
there's a guy.
Actually, man, you should take on like as just as a bit for the next couple of months as a Paxton defender.
Well, I'm saying that Ken Paxton, he has North Dakota lineage. Also, Matt Gaetz been getting a rough deal, I understand, with some certain things. He also comes from a North Dakota family. So, you wonder why we don't leave, because that's how we get treated.
And this is a last point before we go. Prane says it also means more discoveries the longer it takes, which I think is very true. Anyway, we'll be watching this closely. Texas politics is always so fun and horrible as they're attacking more and more trans and people and working class people and Mexican people and Hispanic folks. Nasty, nasty stuff. But we'll keep you up to date with everything that's happening. We're going to go up north to tell a different kind of story about some successes and some things to be hopeful for.
Yeah, kind of a case study. Minnesota closed out its legislative session. We have Isi Baehr-Breen, who former congressperson for Ilhan and Keith Ellison, on talk about the successes, also the sort of failures. And this is a good case study for what progressives can do, and how far they're willing to go with regards to passing things like the school lunch bill and certain labor protections, and a rideshare bill that ultimately the governor vetoed. And Izzy has, I think, interesting perspective on that. This is sort of a lead in. We're going to be doing a lot of Minnesota content. Minnesota. We got to do some content, and this is sort of like, they've had, I think, really good successes, and then to cap it off with Governor Tim Walz immediately saying, "Okay, Uber, we won't go any further," and actually we take that back. I think it's very instructive. And I mean, I wish our federal government was as had as much success as frankly Minnesota did, but it also like shows you that isn't going anywhere. And Izzy points this out too, without the different movements, labor and stuff in Minnesota, and also including like the George Floyd stuff, which put a lot of energy behind these things, and people who are actually going to fight for them in the legislature. So anyway, here is this. Oh, I apologize. Izzy had to switch over to AirPods. This is just a little quick 10-minute interview, but he had to switch over to AirPods. So the sound, I tried to boost it up as much as possible, but I think you'll be able to hear it. And at the end of this, in about 20 minutes, probably about 8 Central, 9 Eastern time, will be in the post game, I think.
Yeah, so patreon.com/leftreckoning. See you there.
There you go. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me is Dave Griscom. Dave, hello.
Hey, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And joining us now to commentate on Minnesota politics is Isi Baehr-Breen. Isi is a former communications director for Ilhan Omar and press secretary for Keith Ellison. Isi, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Matt and Dave. Thanks for having me on. Always
of course.
Love, talking Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, it's as a North Dakotan, it's my favorite state. And we're going to do a lot of actual Minnesota content in the coming months, including the history of the Farm Labor Party and some socialist stuff going on there. But let's talk about the actual electoral politics specifically. Minnesota recently just finished off a legislative session that had a lot good about it, and then a very bad capstone from the governor. But before we get into that, I've been concerned since I've left North Dakota about Minnesota going red. I've kept an eye on the Republican Party there. It's as rancid as they get.
Sure.
It doesn't seem to have gone red. So, can you just give folks a background for Minnesota's politics generally?
Well, let me start by asking you guys a question. Do you guys happen to know, without looking at your notes, the last time that Minnesota voted for a Republican presidential candidate?
I know this. It was Nixon. It was
That's
Nixon,
right?
And then Ike before that, but yeah.
Well before any of us were alive. Yeah. I know there's always talk about Minnesota as a purple state, right? We had Tim Pawlenty for a while. We've had a split legislature. We've had split constitutional offices, but since 2008, it really has been a solid blue state. And if you look, actually, Biden's margins in 2020 were up above where Obama's were in 2012. Minnesota has followed a lot of a lot of trends in northeastern, like heavily blue northeastern states, where the kind of outstate Minnesota gets redder as people congregate to the urban core. So like if you, for example, if you look at a map of, say, the 2020 to 2016 or 2020 to 2012 even elections, it looks a lot more red if you look at the county level data. But then if you look at the popular vote margins, it's increased for Democrats. So
right.
The party, in my view, has never been stronger. I don't want to say never. In recent, it is the strongest it's been in recent memory, right? Now, the one little break there, and this is why I think there's all this news about the legislative session this time around, is that we had a split legislature in 2010, right? Was when the last time we did redistricting, and while the Republicans didn't gerrymander the congressional districts, because those are done by independent redistricting commissions, the state legislative districts were gerrymandered in such a way that it made it extraordinarily difficult for Democrats to win the state Senate, which is why we've had a split legislature with a D+6 to D+8 popular vote margin, right? Is a very common story. Wisconsin would be a solid blue state if not for the gerrymander, right? Legislatively. So that's that's kind of the recent history. And in the midterm elections, Democrats really got their shit together. And I also, I have a deep and abiding love and respect both for the Minneapolis DFL and for a lot of the organizing that happens outstate. But I also don't want to take anything away from the labor and organized labor and social movements that really provide a good chunk of the ground game for down ballot races in Minnesota. And then, of course, look, you've got Minnesota District 5, right? Which is the district that Congresswoman Omar represents, the district that Congressman Ellison represented before her, which is consistently one of the most heavily Democratic districts in the country, and does wild turnout, right? In the past 8 or 10 congressional elections, MN5 has consistently been in the top 15 or top 10 congressional districts in the country in terms of voter turnout. Obviously drives, that's why we win constitutional offices statewide, and it's why down ballot, in the Twin Cities metro, it's just a solid blue wall. So yeah, I do not see Minnesota going blue or going red, anytime in the near future. And I think that pundits that treat it that way are, they just want clicks mostly, I think.
Good.
The data does not support it.
They'll finally stop getting mine. So, that kind of leads to this dynamic of these legislative victories. So we have a labor bill, including sick days, prohibits captive audience stuff, nursing home workers and teachers bigger salaries. We have the universal school lunch stuff, which got a lot of attention. We got the minimum pay rates for Uber and Lyft drivers, which we'll return to. And then eliminated requirements for former felony offenders. Basically, a bunch of promises that got stacked up, and then they finally got into a position where they have to act on them. Izzy, these victories in the legislative session, and we'll circle around to the rideshare bill that Governor Walz eventually vetoed, but was that basically just like, okay, you had this split government for a while and Democrats had a certain number of promises and a certain amount of energy built up because of that, and then they get in power and actually come through on certain things that probably should have been dealt with in this country a while ago, like hungry kids, but at least we're getting there.
No, that's exactly right. So most of these bills, in fact, with the exception of the PRO Act, that's the bill that enshrines abortion statutorily as a civil right, which was, I believe, HF1. That was the first bill that they passed. That obviously was timely on the back of Roe being overturned, but I believe that with that exception, every other major landmark bill that they passed this session has been passed by the House, the state legislature, for the last at least 2 sessions. Certainly that's the case with legal marijuana, with paid sick and safe time, with some of the labor protections. So yeah, a lot of the stuff has just been waiting in the wings. It's not even stuff that, like, you know, where it's a question of like, oh, Democrats got their shit together. You know, the DFL on the legislative side has had their shit together for a while, and the caucus is quite progressive overall. And the issue for the last 4 or 6 years has been a single senator. You know, there's a 1 or 2 senator margin in the Republican-controlled Senate. They flipped that seat, and away they went. So, you know, all of these things have been major priorities for the DFL for quite some time. And I think that this is an example of, you know, they were ready to go. And I remember, you know, just a few months ago, Michigan's legislative session started earlier, so they got to work a little bit faster, right? And they've been doing a lot of the same things. Michigan's story is pretty similar, I think, to Minnesota's right now. And I remember tweeting something like, you know, Minnesota's always been better than Michigan, but boy, the DFL better get their shit together if they want to keep it that way. And, you know, I've never been more happy to say I was wrong. They had their shit together, and they you know, they did the thing.
Good. Well, and one final question is, because the audio is a little bit shaky, but I do want to get your perspective on Governor Walz's veto of the rideshare bill. That was just immediately after Uber's like, "You're going to do democracy. We're not going to play here."
Right. Are you guys hearing me okay? Is this?
We'll boost it a little bit, but yeah.
All right, I'm doing my best here. Yeah, so let me say a few things about that. I certainly would not say that I'm a shill for Governor Walz. I do think that he, as Democratic governors go, he has done, I think, a fairly good job. And you know, I think he's on message a lot of the time, and you can't deny. You know, the fact that the vast majority of this stuff was bing, bang, boom. And I, you know, I'm putting this all out there because I'm getting ready to talk shit after this part. But, you know, he signed the marijuana legalization. That's something that we've been trying to get done for literally 2 decades. Now, Walz vetoing the rideshare bill is obviously fucking terrible. And it's not the only thing this legislative session that he got in the way of. When the nurses were negotiating, the nurses union was negotiating their contract, right? He helped to create a carve out in some of the legislation around their pay and leave for the Mayo Clinic. Obviously, the Mayo Clinic, huge business in Minnesota. And they threatened, I assume that they threatened the same thing that Uber and Lyft did, which is that they would leave the state. So I think, I don't think that Walz is anti-labor. I do think that he is, you know, his spin would probably be that he is trying to balance the needs of working people with trying to keep business in the state. Personally, I think that's nonsense. You know, I do think that it puts kind of a damper on things. From a strategic perspective, it might have been smarter to have that figured out before all those articles went out with, you know, State Congressman Omar Fatah celebrating with all of the drivers, right? And then 2 days later, you know, blah, blah. So there was some coordination that probably should have happened from like a strategic perspective. I also can't say that I'm super surprised that he vetoed it, right? This is not the first time that a Democratic legislature has passed a bill like this, only to have it vetoed by a Democratic governor. It's kind of the tit for tat that you get with Democrats, at this level. He said in his statement, we're going to work to try to find a solution. That's political speech for this isn't happening. And I do think, the last thing that I'll say about it is I think it's a little ironic that, I don't know if you guys have been following Obama's new Netflix show, but he had an episode where he sat along with a Lyft driver, and he's like, boy, wouldn't it be nice if you made minimum wage? And she was like, yeah, that would be nice. Sure. And it's like, super.
Man, well, he's listening out there. It's
that's right. That's right. Oh, he's talking to the people. He's hearing them. Isi
Baehr-Breen at Isaiah_BB. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon, Isi.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Nice of Isi to give us some time there. Good to know what you can get out of actually getting some of these people into office. And that thing of not have. I just appreciate, like, if you're gonna fuck over the drivers, if the drivers are gonna be fucked over, I think it's more useful to have a Democrat doing it than them saying, oh, you know what, actually just donate here. We'll get them next time for you. So that's political lessons in Minnesota. Oh, you're muted.
I just said, yeah. Well, folks, we're going to go over the post-game patreon.com/leftreckoning. We got some fun clips for y'all. We'll be taking your calls and questions. You can leave us a voicemail at 1-940-289-7234. Obviously, if there's something you want us to talk about that we didn't get to in the main show, happy to chat about it then. Next Tuesday, we have Alex Hochuli on the show. We're going to be talking a little bit about populism and the state of the left. If you're not already listening to Bunga Cast, I can't endorse it enough, particularly their most recent bonus episode with Amberly Frost on the Abolish the Family, not weird, countercultural lefty nonsense stuff. They have a pretty good takedown of it, so you should definitely check that out. But Alex will be on the show next week, and we'll see you in the post game. Patreon.com/leftreckoning.
Yep, I'm going to complain about AI. Yep, check it out. See you in about 10 minutes, folks.